about this, the significance, because this is what we see in black culture, where when somebody has passed on, that the night before the funeral, the night before the mourners as well as the family say their final goodbyes, the body will be sleeping in that house.
It's important to do so. It's like if there is an accident, it's important to go to a place where the accident happened in order to release the spirit of the departed. In the house, this is a final goodbye, and that final goodbye traditionally is for the ancestors, the family, to speak to the corpse, to speak to this person, to speak to the ancestors for the last time, to say, we are releasing you peacefully. We have accepted that you are no longer with us, and that is important to do so. That's why they must sleep with her painfully, accept that this person is now departed. This is what this family today, that the truth will now sink with us. They will sleep with a voiceless and a cold body in a wooden house.
Well, quite a cold image to just think about, that this very, very voiceful woman, this woman who has always had a voice, this woman who always had something to say, that when she'll be resting in this house today, and over the evening into tomorrow morning to Orlando Stadium, and a final resting place in Fourways, that she'll be voiceless. But as I said earlier on, it is the legacy that lives on. It is all about what she stood for, and the tributes that have been pouring in, and what many would be saying about this woman, Winnie Mandela, and what she stood for, that will carry on to live with us as journalists as well. That what she stood for. As she was saying, that, you know, the strangest thing is, I remember starting as a young person in the newsroom, and they will tell you that Mum Winnie doesn't really like doing interviews, and watching this documentary and watching the producer of this documentary, Winnie, and almost it seems as though that she has she's built this wall around journalists because of what we know now that is trending on social media, the issue around the STRATCOM, the strategic communications that was unleashed by the apartheid government, by the security agency at the time, and that's why she just had this thing, this wall that she built around the journalists, never keen to speak to journalists. But one person who I've spoken to, I'm gonna ask her. She's standing very far from me right now. But this is one person who's always had that opportunity to speak to Mam Winnie Mandela, who Mam Winnie has been very fond of. And if you've watched the documentary, you may have seen her in that documentary, and that is the acting political reporter, rather the acting political editor of the SABC, Mama Sophie Mukwena. You had a personal relationship with Umama beyond the work relationship that you had with her. And I guess for you as well, this is you also bidding farewell.
Yes, indeed, I had a working relationship, 80% working relationship, but of course perhaps 20% personal, because she was that kind of a person who could share any thoughts with me. And I guess these issues that are currently in the public domain, it's some issues that she was able to talk to me about. But you know, sometimes there are things that are private conversations and you don't divulge. But really a leader, a powerful woman. When I spoke to Zinzi a few years ago, she told me how she was there during the trying time when Tata Nelson Mandela, when he was in prison, how she became a mother, a father, a protector, a teacher, a politician, and not only to her children, but to many in this country. I remember Tokyo Hlatse saying that he was taught to drive by Mama Winnie Mandela, and there are many examples, but she was indeed a very powerful leader. I don't know, she was able to engage and speak to me at any time when I requested her to do so.
Well, I have to say that you are very, very lucky to have that. One story that I relate, Peter, remember on the day of the announcement of Mam Winnie's passing, the story that I relate where we all as journalists at an NGC of the ANC were trying to speak to Mam Winnie, and Mam Winnie was not having any of it. But at that moment when she saw Sophie Mukwena, she was willing to speak to Sophie Mokoena, and that's where we all got our bites at the time to get this piece of Mam Winnie Mandela. And I guess it's those moments and as well as those interactions that some journalists as well as some activists and some people in the streets of Soweto today, those moments and interactions that they had with Mam Winnie, it's those moments that they will relive as this procession makes its way to a home here in Orlando West.
Aldrin, thanks very much indeed. Yes, indeed. And I think many people who will have met Mama Winnie over time will have their own stories and their own recollections of her. And I remember I've met her a few times, and one of the things that always struck me was the aura. There's certain people that you meet and you just get a feeling that there's a presence there, and she certainly had that and had it in abundance. And also the other thing that I remembered straight away from her is that as she spoke to you, you just got a sense that this was a gentle woman, as fearless as she was and as much as she fought. She actually had a gentle soul, particularly when it came to, humanity and people around her. So I'm sure that we're going to be going through the social media to see what people will be remembering and the things that they'll be saying about her.
Absolutely. But right now, Peter, I'm sure we've just seen, as Aldrin was talking to myself and Mokoena, that the casket is finally inside the hearse, and I think they are about to start with that guard of honor procession. And as we understand from Aldrin, it's going to be a bit of a stretch, about an hour from Soweto. From, of course, this funeral home, we understand, is not even far from the home of Winnie Mandela. So everything has been done outsourced locally. Very interesting turn of events there, Peter.
Yes, indeed. 3 kilometers or so, I'm told, is the
it's
total
about 3
distance,
kilometers,
that
procession has started.
And in many ways, this again includes the people, in particular in Soweto, where she spent most of her adult life, to be able to, in some way, say goodbye as the hearse,
the mother of the nation,
travels through.
Absolutely, Peter. You know what I found interesting as well, just as you were still talking to Aldrin St. Pierre, we all know that Winnie will be laid at the Tranquil Fourways Memorial Park out in Fourways, but traditionally, you know that she's still a Mandela, because even though she was divorced in a Western way, nothing was ever done to remove her from the Mandela ancestors. So she practically is still very much a Mandela, and by tradition, she should have been buried next to Ubaba Mandela in Qunu.
Yeah, there's been quite a debate, I think, in terms of what her final wishes were and what the families had required. But as you're saying, it's all going to happen in Fourways tomorrow. But today, it's all eyes in Soweto, her home for many, many years of her life. And as she travels, the hearse travels through Soweto, people, I suppose, taking pictures, remembering, thinking about her, and there'll be some that will be singing, and you can see these young people who perhaps one day will be remembering where they were at this time in South Africa's history.
Absolutely. The MKMVA, they're leading that guard of honor, and we do understand that, of course, it's all the veterans, the army also present. They're leading that procession as Winnie's body takes that stage, that lap for the last time to the home that she lived in for so many years, got banished from in the streets of Orlando. And I suppose those people, this is when they get to say goodbye, Peter. Some people will never even get a chance to go into the house because of all the beefed up security measures. Some of them won't even be able to make it to the funeral. So back to your question earlier as to what do these people have to say when they get there. All they just have to say is bye-bye, Mama Winnie.
Right. Again, people breaking into spontaneous song as Mama Winnie's body travels through the streets of Soweto there on the way home to her house in Orlando West. And this cortege will take its time. It will go very slowly through a relatively short distance but for many, this is a very, very important time in their lives to be given this last opportunity, as you were saying, Alicia, to share in this moment, to say goodbye to a woman that they called the mother of the nation for so long.
Absolutely, and I suppose as tradition would have it, Peter, later on today there is supposed to be that viewing of the body. I'm not sure yet. We're struggling with our reporters on the ground to just find out in terms of those privacy adherences. I mean, what is the protocol around that? Is the public going to view her? Because we do know, remember Mandela laid in state for about 3 days and people were actually able to go and view her. So I haven't heard anything around that pertaining to Winnie. And of course, we do know that that viewing essentially takes place during the vigil.
Yes, and look, I mean, getting inside the house has been something that hasn't happened.
Yeah.
And that's been kept very private and reserved for
the family.
very few people and dignitaries and special people. As we've said, cameras themselves have not been allowed in the house, and so that there's been an element of it that's been allowed to be private and remain private throughout. So it will be interesting, particularly when one considers that tomorrow, well today, and tomorrow is the last opportunity. Will there be a viewing by the general population? It's difficult to say, as it say, it's not been communicated.
Absolutely, we are awaiting the details around that, and of course we will be informing the public as to when and how. We do know, however, that the condolences book, Peter, that has been all over the ANC offices across the country. People have been able to go and make their marks, those that come from other parts of the country, and also some millennials who have also had the opportunity to go and sign online. There is a condolence book that is online. You can just Google it and of course put your message of condolence to the late mother of the nation.
And we're just seeing photographers there, journalists trying to take pictures and capture these moments. And no doubt that this will be a story that's going to be carried across the whole globe, the whole world. Eyes on South Africa, because she was a global icon from right across the continent, Europe, Americas, you name it. People have heard and knew of Winnie Mandela.
Yeah, well, if you haven't heard or about the late struggle icon, then I don't know, maybe you're not really into current affairs, but everybody who's anybody, young and old, have all since the announcement of her passing, have all been visible, showing their support and of course taking part in the various commemorations that have been opened in her honor across the nation.
If you are just tuning in, we are bringing you scenes from Soweto in Johannesburg, and this is a cortege, a hearse being taking the body of Mama Winnie Mandela to her house in Orlando West in Soweto, where a lot of prayers, a lot of a vigil will be taking place this evening to say final goodbyes to Mama Winnie ahead of her Category 1 funeral that's been arranged for her, that will be taking place tomorrow at Orlando Stadium, and later she'll be buried at Fourways at Avalon Cemetery next to her grandchildren.
We're expecting a very packed Orlando West Stadium tomorrow, and of course later on this evening as the final memorial service / vigil will be taking place there. I'm just wondering, when it comes to security measures, as we can see there, Peter, I mean, this has been one of the biggest questions when it came to an event of this magnitude. I mean, it is so big. You've seen throngs of people coming in and high-ranking officials as well. It must be such a nightmare trying to coordinate everything, and also having to make sure that security is at the top. We've seen the army, we hear that the army is part of these proceedings, and the MK-MVA. We've seen police also, and it looks like these are the special tactical teams that are part of these processions. So security definitely beefed up in alignment with the occasion.
Absolutely. And again, with the stature of the person that South Africa will be bidding farewell, a Category 1 a funeral is the highest that can be given to a civilian that is not a former head of state or former deputy head of state. So such is her recognition, and so all of this is befitting of someone who's getting that kind of recognition for the contribution that she made for the history of this country, freeing the people, and the many years of work post 1994, because she continued with the struggle for the poor and the vulnerable, way beyond democracy, spending I think more than 15 years in Parliament as an MP, and she served also as a deputy minister as well. But
she was the president of the ANC Women's League. I mean, she really was a highly decorated female in the politics. Even though we didn't see much of her, we did see her time and again. You'd remember one of my fondest memories of her, Peter, when of course I think there was a lot of squabbles within the ANC, and she actually came and she put Julius Malema aside, Cyril Ramaphosa, and she said, you two need to start working together. And it seems like you know, that has resonated. We've seen the developments in the country, so that bears testament to the type of stature of woman that she was. As you said, she had a presence and an aura.
And I think that unifying quality that you talk about has been playing out as people from various political parties have been paying their tributes and paying their last respects. And it, whilst the ANC was her home, her political home, and she stayed throughout, people from other political parties have been doffing their hats and paying tribute to her, because they saw her first as a woman who liberated South Africans, and one that cared for all of the country's people, not just those that belong to one political party.
True.
So her role as a unifier and someone that was brought in to bring peace, I think played very much into that. She saw humanity in its totality, not just particular individuals.
Very important point. I mean, Peter, when you look at this, I mean, I think in history it will go down in history as probably the first woman who got such a send-off. This is such a befitting send-off for Winnie Mandela. I don't think in my life, particularly in the news space, I've ever seen a funeral like this, particularly for a woman, as you mentioned, who wasn't even a head of state. We've never seen anything like this. This is absolutely remarkable, and I think government, alongside the ruling party and everybody who's participated in making sure that Winnie gets the best send-off that she deserves, needs to be recommended.
Yeah, and I'm just seeing these young boys and girls, these children who are going to be looking back in their lives, and they'll be saying, you know, I was there, when we said goodbye to Mama Winnie. I was there in Soweto at the time that the country said goodbye to Mama Winnie, and they'll have their own thoughts, and we'll remember this time. As you say, quite remarkable scenes that we're seeing, uncommon, and reserved for people of great stature, as she was.
Absolutely, and I think, you know, that message once again of remembering and celebrating our icons while they are still alive, I think, this brings tears to my eyes, Peter, to see that this is now, we're talking about her because we're never going to see her again, but wouldn't it be nice to make reference to her, knowing that she was still alive, you know, and all the great works that she's done.
So this cortege continues to travel slowly through the streets of Soweto on the way to her house in Orlando West, where she spent many, many, many years of her life. And tonight will be, I think, a mixture of somberness, sadness, but also celebrating a life well lived. It was difficult. It was a hard life. It was one that faced many, many challenges, but one that was resilient, and one through the face of extreme adversity just refused to give up. And you know, I think a lot of people will be grateful that she saw much of what she fought for come into being, though she still hoped much more could have been done for the most vulnerable and the poor. So for her, she'll rest that a lot of rights were given to her people that she fought for, but I think part of her will be sad that poverty, inequality
still prevails.
Was still something that needed to be dealt with.
Absolutely, Pete. I mean, as a social worker, I mean, that was one of her biggest cause, that to make sure that the well-being of every South African. And I mean, just looking at her, even in the most recent images, you could never tell that this was a woman who had been so hard done, like so wronged by history. Like an entire history has totally wronged this woman, yet she made it look like it was so easy.
Yeah. And yet it was never easy. I mean, throughout her struggle, career and period, it goes back years and years. I mean, I think about her first incarceration as far back as 1958, after a women's march in Johannesburg. She was arrested along with 1,000 or so other women. This was a march that was deemed illegal by the apartheid government, and she declined posting bail for 2 weeks as a sign of protest at the time. So, you know, as far back as then, that was her first incarceration. Of course, that was the first of many, many that would follow. And that takes us back to 1958. And she continued the fight and never gave up. She could not have known the difficulties that she was going to face in the years that came. But as we were saying earlier, she stepped into the breach. She led from the front, and she never did anything she never asked anybody to do anything that she didn't do herself. That's
true, that's true. They say here that during her decades of police intimidation and harassment, her emotional brutalization, having had her family torn apart and her closest friends betray her, and her physical imprisonment and banishment, Winnie had developed combative defenses against a world that was unfailingly hostile. And since the latter stages of her exile, rumors had begun to circulate about her increasingly erratic behavior, which was of course the recourse to drink and occasional bouts of violent behavior. I mean, these are the things that I mean, like you were saying, Peter, like at the time she had to make decisions that a lot of us would frown upon if we were given the same circumstances today. Yeah,
as we were saying, you know, Gwede Mantashe says she was in the belly of the beast. And so a lot of the decisions that were made had to be taken in that context. You know, in the United States, they talk about something called post-traumatic stress disorder, and they saw this syndrome with Vietnam War veterans that had come back having served on the front line in Vietnam. And this is something that isn't often talked about. When you are put in traumatic situations for a prolonged period of time, as she was, how she survived and got through that is quite remarkable.
200 days in solitary confinement, Peter.
It was nearly 500 actually in the end.
My goodness.
So one can't even begin to understand or comprehend just what that kind of trauma can do to an individual. And yet, despite that, she carried on carrying the flag and fighting for the liberation of the majority of the people of this country. And
you know, in all of this, one of her most revered trait was her beauty. None of that. You could tell that this was a woman who's been, you know, through all these struggles. She always, without fail, till the day that she died, Mum Winnie always looked absolutely beautiful. And of course, the masses, I mean, we were saying that she was quite the beacon of light for all the young women that were coming up after her, myself included.
And I think one of the things that she did as well was in many ways highlight the fact that women were very much a part of the struggle as well.
Yes.
They weren't
a side note. Yeah.
They were soldiers.
Yeah.
They fought on the front line and they contributed fully to the struggle.
That's very
and whilst a few names might come through and a few names may be celebrated, I think Mam Winnie will be the first to say that she didn't do this alone, and that there were many, many women that got inspiration from her and walked alongside her, and also women that inspired her to do great things. And so if we remember her, I think it's also important that we use this opportunity to remember the many, many women that contributed to the struggle, many that died, many that were jailed, many that were tortured, and walked the path that Mam Winnie walked.
And Peter, you know, it brings me back to that patriarchal stance that, you know, we haven't seen much of our female leaders that have been put on a pedestal, such as the male liberators that fought alongside these women, but all we're getting in terms of facts is it's always the men up there.
So this cortege continues to travel, but it seems to be moving a little bit quicker than it did initially. And again, traveling towards Orlando West to the home of Mama Winnie, where she spent much of her time and never left, even after 1994, when the whole of South Africa literally became more open and she could have chosen to live anywhere else, but she stayed in the township next to her people, as she always affectionately wanted to be. And it is here that these images that we're seeing, her home township away from her home province, the Eastern Cape.
That's a very interesting turn of events indeed, as we were alluding earlier on as to that battle that could have been arisen as to where should be laid to rest, you know, in terms of the law, or legally or traditionally. But it seems like it has been widely accepted, that because I think it came out very early that she was actually going to be buried out at the Fourways Park, and that is where I understand her great-granddaughter is actually buried. So it's only befitting that she also goes there, and I suppose maybe it could have been her wishes. We're talking earlier on, Peter, about cremation, and we're talking about the fact that no, in our culture, cremation is not necessarily such a trendy thing, because we believe that the body, even though the spirit has left it, is still very important.
Oh, you're so right. All right. So, yeah, images that you're seeing here. Again, this cortege carrying the body of the late struggle icon, Mama Winnie Mandela. As we're saying, it's starting to move a little bit quicker than it has been. So perhaps this journey might be shorter. We had anticipated it could take as much as an hour to get to her house. It's a short distance, but one I think that is important for everybody in Soweto who has an opportunity to be able to have this time to pay their last respects and just to say goodbye in the way that they can as this hearse travels through the streets.
Great visuals that we're seeing in front of us, historical visuals indeed. The send-off of Mama Winnie Mandela to go down in history as one of the most memorable, the most befitting, the most unifying, and I'm out of words, Peter.
All right, so we are, okay. So, you know, as I said, we were looking at some of the key moments and a long history of struggle that she was involved in, and we just talked about her first incarceration. Her first banning order came in 1962, and that confined her to the magisterial district of Johannesburg. And what the banning order did at the time was prohibited her from entering learning institutions, barred her from addressing any kind of gathering. And banning orders also made it illegal for media outlets to quote, even quote, people that were under banning orders, and that was in a bid to try and silence them. So from as early as 1962, she'd experienced her first banning order, and that was long before this banishment, which she eventually had to Bramford in the Free State.
Very interesting there, it says, Peter. I mean, this is incomprehensible, the fact that you were banned and you are prevented from living, working and socializing like any other ordinary person. I mean, she was even, like you were saying, prohibited from publishing or addressing more than one person at a time, and subjected to house arrest and incarcerated in solitary confinement, terrorized by the police, and an arbitrary arrest on May 17 in 1977. That's when she was actually uprooted from her house with nothing but the robe that she was wearing on her back, and this was what subsequently led to her being confined in that cell for almost, is it 500 days now?
Yeah. And, you know, for people to understand just what the consequences of a banning order for someone like her were, in 1965 she got her second banning order, and that meant she had to give up her job as a social worker, and that meant that she struggled at that time to get a meaningful source of income due to pressure by the apartheid police. So, you know, it had very severe consequences, and this was effectively a single mother, because her husband had been jailed, having to try and take care of her family, but the apartheid regime had found ways to make sure that she was confined just to the neighborhood of Orlando West, effectively in prison in a very small area, and not allowed to carry out her profession. So severe consequences beyond just being a restricted person in terms of movement.
I mean, when we talk about those circumstances, Peter, I mean, also the fact that her children had to grow up without their mother at most times, and their father, and of course because she was they kept on moving her from place to place, and Zinzi and Zenzile literally grew up in all around Africa.
All right, okay, so we're going to leave these scenes in Soweto. We'll come back to them a little bit later on, because what we're going to do now is cross to New York, where
AM our time, which is about 5:30 your time, Peter. So we're just moments away from that. South Africa's ambassador, Jerry Machila, will be the Secretary General, the President of the General Assembly, and then ambassadors representing each and every region of the United Nations. So Africa, the Middle East, Europe, South America, and so on, the Caribbean and the CARICOM states. So each ambassador will speak. Then the host country ambassador, the United States, will speak. Of course, United Nations is being hosted in New York by the United States government. And then there'll be some dignitaries, as I mentioned, Professor Gay McDougall, who is in that iconic picture standing next to Nelson Mandela as an observer from the United States at the time in 1994 as he cast that historic vote. And so that really gives you a sense. There'll be some music performances, I understand, but it's in essence that is kind of, it's a diplomatic event in a sense. So officials from various countries, various nations, as member states of the United Nations pay tribute.
And Sherwin, speaking of those high-ranking, of course, celebrities that will be attending the funeral, we do understand Naomi Campbell has already made her way to South Africa. But do tell us, we do understand there's a lot of South Africans, particularly in New York, where you are. How have they been allowed to pay homage to the fallen struggle stalwart? Particularly, we've seen a lot of condolences, events that have been organized across the country in her honor. How have they done it in the States?
I can only speak for what has happened here in New York, Alicia. Two memorials. There was one massive memorial held in Harlem last night. There's another one at the United Nations today. The South African mission to the United Nations opened a book of condolences for anybody, not only South Africans, to come and pay tribute. But as I've said, we haven't seen the level of enthusiasm, if you will, in terms of paying homage to Winnie Mandela here. Certainly not on the same level as we did when Tata died in 2013.
And Sherwin, just as we know, I mean, we do know Winnie was, of course, a fighter for women's rights. What have some of the women's rights groups said? Particularly, I'm hoping we would hear a statement from on her passing. And of course, we've heard a lot of women saying that, you know, we need to, as young women of this country, try and start emulating the figure that Winnie was.
I'm going to let the Executive Director of UN Women speak for herself. She is traveling abroad at the moment. I understand that she's en route to the funeral in South Africa, but she did, as my understanding goes, is delivering a message via video message at the UN Memorial in a short time. So let her speak for herself. What I will do is I will quote something from businessman Saki Makazoma, who spoke on her behalf at the Harlem Memorial last night. And he talked about why, he raised this question, Alicia, why the South African regime didn't kill Mama Winnie. Because they could have, he said. They did so many more with many other people, and she was much more troublesome than most. And I came to the conclusion, this is Saki speaking, that the reason why they did not do that is because they wanted to kill a people, they wanted to kill all of us through her. And she said, no, it's not going to happen through me.
And perhaps finally, I know that at this service that took place in Harlem, that a lot of women were wearing dukes and headscarves, and I guess that's become quite iconic in telling the story and remembering Mama Winnie.
Absolutely. I mean, that was kind of what the message that went out with the invitation. Please come with your dukes. I was looking to see if some of the guys were wearing dukes, but they weren't, Peter. I hope you brought yours, certainly for the next couple of days. I'll be looking forward to that. But I will talk about, very briefly, Nsiki Lanford, a close confidant of Winnie Mandela. Apparently, she was her personal assistant when Mama Winnie was a social worker working at the Baragwanath Social Development Department. And she talked to Peter about how much of a showstopper Winnie Mandela was. Quote, Winnie was a showstopper. You just couldn't keep walking straight. You had to turn. Her beauty, her stature, her figure, her build, her walk. And it was just unbelievable, she said. Wherever she went, she was a showstopper. And I can tell you, many women were showstoppers last night wearing those beautiful dukes in tribute to the late Mama Winnie Mandela.
Sherwin, that's where we're going to leave it for the time being. Thanks very much indeed. That's our correspondent, Sherwin Briceby, speaking to us from the UN building in New York. And this is 30 minutes away from a special memorial service that's taking place at the UN to honor Mama Winnie Mandela on her passing. And yeah, New York, as he was saying, is a town and a city that, as Sherwin was saying, contributed and feels like they were at the forefront in fighting apartheid. But we come back to South Africa now, where this cortege is continuing its journey from the funeral parlor to her home in Orlando West.
Well, I wonder how far they are now, Peter. We were understanding that it was going to take about an hour just to allow, because of the throngs of people also that have also emerged and made themselves part of this procession. There's media also, there's heightened security. There you have it. I mean, there's soldiers. We know that the army is there. We know the MKMVA is also there. Highly protected, secure event that this is. And what you're currently seeing now is that hearse making its way through to the home of the late struggle stalwart Winnie Mandela, where tonight we understand there will be a vigil and, of course, particularly a viewing for the family members.
All right, let's cross now to Aldrin Sampia, who's there to take us through the next part of this unfolding story. Aldrin?
Well, yes, as you can see now, the hearse has arrived here at Orlando West. The procession has finally arrived here after a long walk, as well as a guard of honor throughout the streets of Soweto, the streets leading from the funeral parlor in Orlando East all the way here to Orlando West. We understand now what's going to happen is that, as the family has explained in a statement, that the men of the family, from the Madikizela family as well as from the Mandela family, will take the casket and then they will carry it all the way into the house. So viewers at home must not be surprised when they see these visuals, those visuals of the family members, quite specifically the males, as the family has indicated in the statement, that it will be the males from the Matigizela as well as the Mandela family that will be carrying the casket as it makes its way here at the house here in Orlando West. And you know, just watching the visuals of these members of the community in Soweto, those who have formed this guard of honor, those who are marching alongside the hearse, those who are marching alongside these MKMVA members who are carrying flags of the former leaders of the ANC. It was just reminiscent of back in the days, the fight against apartheid, the fight against colonialism, where you found that activists at the time, when they were being buried, that's what the streets of Soweto would be looking like. I'm just going to bring in our acting political editor, Sophie Mukwena, to speak more about that. You know, when you watch those visuals, it's really reminiscent of those days.
Yes, it speaks to who she was. You would recall during the trying times, particularly in the 80s, when violence was rife, when the apartheid government was doing everything that it could to suppress the activism. Mam Winnie was seen in the streets of Soweto, streets of Buipatong, streets of Sebokeng, streets of East Rand. You know, during the massacre, she was there. She would arrive first and she would speak to the families. And during the burials, when people were carrying those coffins, and she would be walking and hoisting her fist up there, shouting Amandla. And this it looks like it is back in those days, and you can see the Umkhonto weSizwe former veterans standing here outside the house. You can see that they are reliving what they used to do previously. The flags of the different leaders of the ANC, and they have them here. And here at home, young and old, standing, waiting, and the night vigil tonight, I am sure it is going to be packed. I saw Patricia de Lille, I saw Reverend Jesse Jackson, I saw Julius Malema, I saw all the ANC leaders except the Deputy President and the President for now. But you can see it's green and gold, red, ordinary colors, ordinary people. That speaks to who she was.
And it also speaks to what everyone has been saying, including the President Cyril Ramaphosa, that this was one woman who was a unifier. And I'll never forget those visuals, the visuals of where she had Cyril Ramaphosa on one hand and Julius Malema on the other hand, the visuals of where she had former President Jacob Zuma on one hand and Cyril Ramaphosa on the other hand. And today again, here you have people from different political organizations. You mentioned Patricia de Lille. And the strange thing about Patricia de Lille being here is that the party has said that she must explain herself, for instance, why she went to the memorial service that was held in Brantford by the EFF, and yet it almost seems that she's defying what the DA is saying that she mustn't do, because now she's here yet again to pay her respects to Mam Winnie. She actually posted a picture of her and Mam Winnie marching through the streets. I can't remember which streets it were, but they were wearing T-shirts which seemed to have been that it was a moment where they were trying to make sure that this campaign around HIV/AIDS is loud and everyone can understand exactly what the fight against HIV/AIDS was at the time.
Yes, defiant. In the same way, Winnie Mandela was defiant, particularly when she felt that she was doing the right thing, you know, believing in what she believed in. And Patricia saying it was about honoring this woman, it wasn't about political grandstanding. And I think the DA will have to do introspection, because in the same rally, you had the leader of DA who is currently in Parliament, who delivered a message in Brantford. Therefore, I think consistency, but typical Patricia de Lille defiant. You'd recall that the arms deal investigation, she is the one who got a dossier. She is the one who spoke to Winnie. They had a very, very close relationship. I think it dates back to the struggle when Patricia was still a member of the Pan-Africanist Congress.
Well, what you can see now are the visuals of, as I've indicated earlier on, the men from the Madikizela as well as the Mandela family who will be carrying the hearse, rather who will be carrying the coffin, the casket, all the way to the house here in Orlando West. In the background you can hear struggle songs. I'm just going to try and get a bit closer just to give you a sense of the songs that are being sung, and of course, as we mentioned earlier on, quite reminiscent of those days where you had young people protesting in the streets of Soweto.
Winnie Mandela, Isoja, 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 Pakita Soja man, Isoja, Isoja, Pakita Soja man, Isoja, Isoja, Winnie Mandela, Isoja, Isoja, Pakita Soja man, Isoja, Isoja, Winnie Mandela, Isoja, Isoja, Winnie Mandela, Isoja, 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 Isoja.
Well, struggle songs here on the streets of Soweto. Winnie Mandela, Isoja, Isoja. Winnie Mandela, Isoja, Isoja. She's a soldier. And that's what she stood for. You know, just seeing the MKMVA members here dressed in the uniform, dressed in this camouflage, and there was one visual that was trending, I think about 2-3 days ago, when we were remembering Chris Hani, where Winnie Mandela was standing wearing MKMVA uniform, wearing this camouflage, standing next to Chris Hani.
Yes, indeed, but the picture that will remain in my mind is when Madiba was released from prison, when he went to Tanzania, I think, a picture of Madiba wearing the MK uniform, and then you had Mam Winnie wearing that MK uniform, and Thabo Mbeki then, and they were walking and then enter a rendezvous in Tanzania to speak to the MK when they were trying to persuade them to accept that the struggle now, it's not about arms anymore but negotiations. So what is prevailing currently, the picture that is prevailing, it speaks to who Winnie Mandela was, and the music, the songs, the struggle songs, and people singing those favorite songs. You'd recall her favorite song about O.R. Tambo, you know.
We are now watching visuals of the casket being carried to the house of Winnie Mandela. As I was saying earlier on, that 2 weekends ago on Sunday, when she left this house, they were going to the hospital. Of course, all the family could pray for at the time is that she will return, the same Winnie that they knew. Remember the visuals of Friday, the Friday afternoon when she was in church as well, that she'll remain the same resilient Mum Winnie that she was. But unfortunately, that announcement that came on Monday, the 2nd of April, the announcement that this struggle stalwart has passed on. Let's quickly speak about the draping of this casket, being draped in the ANC flag. And I remember even speaking to former President Jacob Zuma when Mum Winnie was celebrating her 80th birthday, and I said that no matter how critical she was of the party, no matter how she may have felt that the party may have disappointed her, she never left the ANC.
Indeed, you'd recall her last public appearance in terms of the party activity. It was during the voter registration. We came here, and then the president of the ANC came here. They went to a voting station where she's registered. She checked her details, and then when she was supposed to come home to rest, and she refused. She said, I want to accompany my president, Cyril Ramaphosa. And they went to Maponya Mall. She couldn't take a lap or walk around while Ramaphosa embarked on the walkabout. She went to Nando's. She sat there. And I remember going there to go and greet her. I have never seen Mama so happy. And that was my last time I saw her. But every year, I normally go to Midlands, to the Methodist Church, to do an Easter story and covering her. But this Easter, I don't know what happened. We couldn't go there. And then on Easter Monday, the sad news.
The Easter Monday, the sad news that has led us to this moment where you see the casket of Mom Winnie Mandela draped in the ANC flag, and just listen to the song being sung in the background. Hamba kahle mkhonto wesizwe. I was watching a documentary, and in this one documentary, someone was saying that she was a commander of the MKMV of mkhonto wesizwe, but she was a commander here on the ground in the streets of Soweto.
Yes, indeed. She had her soldiers around her, that is the ordinary masses here in Soweto. And you saw her when the body, when they were making their way in the yard, you saw political parties, the leaders talking and laughing. And that is who Mama Winnie Mandela was. I saw Zolinzima Vavi, I saw Malema, I saw Paul Mashatile, I saw Pule Mabi, I saw Memantombela. You know, it speaks to who Winnie was, but at the end of the day, he was a loyal member of the African National Congress. It is for that reason, you remember during that voter registration, her last words were, I want Malema to come back. So you can see, I mean, she was so committed to the ANC.
I'm just quickly going to quote a quote from a poem actually that author Sisonke Msimanga wrote about. It's a poem from Gladolyn Brooks, an American author. She wrote a poem about Mom Winnie Mandela. I'm just going to quote from this one verse or stanza of the poem where she says, Winnie Mandela, she, the she of our vision, the code, the articulate rehearsal, the founding mother, shall direct our choir of makers and white music. She not only describes her as the mother of the nation, but the founding mother.
Yes, indeed. You'd recall that when the title of Mother of the Nation was used here in South Africa, it was addressed to her or directed to her, because many children came to her house during the struggle, and she was there like a mother. You would recall, I remember when EFF leaders were fired from the ANC. This is the first house they visited. So she was indeed a mother, not only in terms of politics, but just like a mother. You know, when you are in trouble or you are frustrated, he was there. She was there. She was there to speak to you and comfort you. That is why she was called Mother of the Nation.
One thing certainly that we can't take away from Mom Winnie, as well as this figure that she is the complexity of her character as well. And some may attack her, like the ANC Secretary General was saying at the memorial that was held by the ANC Women's League yesterday, that not enough was done to correct the untruths. But she also says that I know that I'll always have enemies. I know that there will always be enemies.
In life, as a human being, you have to understand that there will be people who like you, there will be people who will hate you, sometimes based on misunderstanding. We are all human. You can't be perfect. And I think for me, that's it. And two, she was fully aware that she is human. It is for that reason she was able to forgive people, and she could have a discussion with those who persecuted her. That's how life is. I mean, but the important thing is that she was a leader. She was indeed a leader who understood that you have to behave in a particular way at a particular time. And of course, as human beings, we erred. And perhaps she did. And I think the ANC secretary is correct. But the reality...
Israel,